Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Todd Klindt's SharePoint podcast number 252, recorded live in my basement on July 6th, 2015. I am your host and the Women's World Cup champion. No, that doesn't work either. I'm just me. I'm just Todd Klindt. I'm your host tonight, but I do have a special guest, so it's not all bad news. It's not just me. Before we get started, though, I wanted to tell you about the folks at Rackspace. They gave me that flag back there. They send me paychecks every couple of weeks. It's very nice of them. Very completely unnecessary, but very nice of them. So you can find out about all the great SharePoint products we have at sharepoint.rackspace.com. There's white papers, videos, things like that, and then all kinds of other fun stuff. And while you're out there on the internet, get you one of those web browsers open, click around, watch a couple of funny videos. As you guys, listeners to the podcast, know, I'm a big fan of the funny cat videos, the sneezing panda videos I've also become quite fond of. But while you're out there doing all that kind of stuff, also go out to toddklindt.com, and you can find my blog there at toddklindt.com/blog. I got a YouTube channel. You can go to youtube.com/ToddKlindtNetcast. You can find me on Twitter, twitter.com/ToddKlindt. I'm on Instagram, though I've never posted a picture, nor will I probably ever. But I do that just so one of you jokers doesn't go out and get my name instead and then start posting pictures of stuff and embarrassing me. My mom looks at Instagram. I can't be having that. But you can find out all those things, and hopefully they're all going to be in the lower third down here, so you can just copy them to your heart's content. But go out there and find out all the great stuff I got going on out there on the internet. Still need to figure out a better thing for this note thing. So production notes, as you can tell, I put a bigger monitor back here. I told you guys that I got a new podcasting machine a couple of months ago, and it just so happened to come with a 32-inch TV. I don't need a 32-inch TV, so I've been trying to figure out what to do with this dumb thing for the last month. So today I got this brilliant idea about 7 minutes before I went online of throwing it back there, big picture for you guys. Well, now it's picking up glare from every light in this room, so that didn't turn out to be quite as clever as I thought it would be. But so I got that, but I need to figure out something better for the slides and stuff. I used to have the slide deck on a different machine, because I didn't have one machine that could do it all. Now I've got it on this machine, so now my mouse has got to move all over. But that's a production thing. We'll look into that. Last week's podcast was good. Everything came out well. I think I got it out Thursday-ish, pretty close. It was all good. And this week, not much going on, so we should be able to get this one out pretty quickly as well. Lori's like, not Thursday. Thursday afternoon. So yeah, normally I try to get these out on Thursday mornings, but I didn't quite hit that. I've got a bevy of excuses. The dog ate my software. It rained. I'm full of them. Stop me whenever you've heard enough. But hopefully it'll be out early this week. All right, so none of you guys tuned in to listen to my excuses or my favorite funny videos on the internet. Y'all came to hear the meat, the discussion, the topics. And this is a very special week for me because we have a guest. So I've had some guests before, and I think tonight's guest will continue the legacy of a good guest. A good friend of mine. We've known each other forever. I can't even remember when we met. It's been forever ago. But Kirk Evans from Microsoft, and wow, that glare is horrible.
Wow, that is fleshed out just completely white. Look at that.
Oh my goodness!
It's actually a good thing. It's hiding my big fat ugly mug. Look at that.
Yeah, that is terrible.
That is abstract painting. What is that?
That is horrible. So imagine a very handsome, ruggedly handsome man here.
And then the picture of the other guy who he's pointing to.
Yeah, and then Kirk's picture, yeah. We'll fix that in post, Kirk. I got some great guys. We'll knock that right out. So Kirk, take a minute, tell the nice folks at home who you are, what you do, and one interesting fact about yourself.
So my name's Kirk Evans. I work for Microsoft. You can tell because I actually just started a sentence with the word so I apologize that. I've been with Microsoft for about 11 years, and I started out in developer platform evangelism. I was a developer, and then I moved over into SharePoint, and then I lost all sense of proper architecture and development, and then thankfully I moved over to Azure. So I've been with Azure for about 3 years and focused solely on helping some of the largest customers in the world adopt Azure and start to build really interesting business solutions. Interesting fact, I've known Todd so long that I was telling him I was packing up a cooler with the kids to go out to the pool this weekend, and I pulled out an old SharePoint 911 koozie that he had given me a while back. So I guess there's my interesting fact for today.
Yeah, he's so a funny thing about those koozies. Shane ordered those, and I can't remember how long ago, but I mean it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, something like that, and ordered however many, we'll say 100. I'm convinced that those things replicate like rabbits, because it would seem like at every conference we would give out 200 of those and we would still have 75 left. So like it's like there were boxes of them in his basement, and he was giving them out to homeless people in Cincinnati. He was burning them to keep his house warm, and those things just they just never went away. I'm convinced he's still got a box of 1,000 of them in his basement. It's they just would.
He
they would
calls them. I remember.
Yeah, it's. They were everywhere. We just couldn't give those things away.
You're gonna have to pair one up to the cow.
Yes. So I was telling. So for you loyal podcast listeners, this is all old hat for you. But I was telling Kirk about Pat the SharePoint cow and her Pat's travels around the world. And if you guys haven't heard the story, I can't remember which podcast it's in. But if you go out to Facebook and search for Pat, last name, the SharePoint cow, and friend them, you can see it's a cow that we gave somebody at a conference like 5 or 6 years ago, and she's taken this cow all over the world with her and taking pictures of it, in Greece and everywhere. Cow's been 100 places I've never been, so that's been a great story. So I brought Kirk on. So part of this is, like I said, Kirk and I have been friends forever, and we both spoke at the SharePoint Evolutions Conference in London back in April, and I sat in on a couple of Kirk's sessions. And so as a SharePoint guy, especially as a SharePoint admin, the last couple of years have been kind of rough, and haven't really known what my future held, what SharePoint was going to look like for the next version, what my job was going to look like, if I was going to have to start learning how to make burgers or sack groceries. So far, I'm 41. My hands here, they don't have any calluses on them. I don't actually really work for a living, and I was kind of hoping to keep that going for a while, but it's been kind of scary for us. We just haven't known what was going on. And one of the technologies that I've been playing with a little more, been curious about, is Azure and the associated stuff, and we're going to get into what all of that means. Azure's kind of a big umbrella. There's a lot of things underneath there. So when I was in London, I sat in on a couple of Kirk sessions, and he did a couple of sessions on Azure AD, which was kind of interesting, again, just kind of feeling things out. And between that session that you did, Kirk, at Evolution, and a bunch of stuff that I sat in on at Ignite, I've really kind of jumped into the Azure AD thing, and I've started having some good ideas on how to work that in. Yes, it clicked. And so I last week or 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that Lori had taken the 7553 Azure architecture exam and passed it. I've also been studying for it, and we'll be taking that here in the next couple of weeks. And again, it's all partially because of your session and some other stuff I saw there, and Ignite got me excited about it. So that's kind of why I wanted to have Kirk on, because I think for us SharePoint folks, the Azure, the Office 365 thing is kind of nebulous, kind of scary, yep. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've got excited about it, and so I kind of want to get some of that excitement for you guys. So Kirk, why don't you start out with just kind of give the kids, give the hooligans here in the chat room and everybody else, tell what Azure AD is. Kind of explain it a little bit.
If you remember, I don't know, 10 years ago, it seems like, whenever Active Directory domain services really kind of took a foothold in the enterprise, and everybody was like, okay, we can put users in there, we can control printers, and we can start to do unnatural things with forests and trusts, and start to set up this really insane architecture. And then we had to employ people to do all these things on premises. And then somebody came out with a fruit device that, couldn't join to the domain, and suddenly everybody wanted to access internal reports. And the CEO is in there holding their iPad saying, I want to access those internal reports on this iPad. Hence, that to me kind of screams, what is the value of Azure AD? Azure AD is a directory service in the cloud. It has the ability to manage users and groups, and with Windows 10, we'll see devices. But it also has some other really cool capabilities where it allows you to perform things like cloud federation and access to third-party applications, and even access to on-premises SharePoint. So that's kind of my pitch.
Yeah, and one of the things, and I mostly knew this, but one of the things I liked that you talked about in your session, you had a bunch of windows up and you were showing us how to do stuff, and you're like, Azure AD, Active Directory in the cloud is not a VM with Active Directory on it. It's a service that Microsoft runs. It's an endpoint that you connect to. It's not AD like you think of AD. It's kind of AD on steroids.
Yeah, it's not you actually like promoting your own, creating a virtual machine and promoting it to a domain controller and creating a standalone force, any of that stuff. It's really just a directory as a service. And the cool part is, and I'm hedging a bet here that most of the listeners probably have already had an Office 365 account or have even might manage a tenant in Office 365. When you have that, you actually are using Azure AD behind the scenes. So when you add users, when you assign permissions and licenses and all that stuff, it's actually managed by Azure AD behind the scenes. In fact, that's kind of where a lot of the innovation first came when they were building the service, was to support Office 365 as they were rolling out that service.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, because once you get your users into Office 365, and we SharePoint folks, we think the world revolves around SharePoint. We see everything as SharePoint. So we get all of our users in there, and we're thinking in our head, our users are in SharePoint. But like you said, in reality, they're in Azure AD, which means now we can use those identities and those people for other products, and it's real easy to slide right into using those same identities for other stuff. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it. And one of the things I've talked about this a couple of times in the show is with Windows 10, which is going to RTM here in a couple of weeks, and I'm guessing most everybody's looked at it at least once. And with Windows Server 2016 coming out, next year, those those OSs have built-in support for joining Azure Active Directory domains. So you don't even need domains on-prem anymore.
So today, if you're going to build a SharePoint farm and you want to host it maybe in virtual machines, host it in Azure. So Azure is this big, huge umbrella of a whole bunch of really cool toys that developers, pros really love to play with, because there's something for everybody. But if you're going to build a SharePoint farm, kind of what the audience would be interested in. So if you're going to build a SharePoint farm, you still need a domain controller. You still have to have a domain controller in Azure that's close to your database and close to the SharePoint farm itself. So Azure AD won't replace that part. But if you're using Office 365, which is just really SharePoint as a service, it already has Azure AD behind it. Even better is if you already have Azure AD with Office 365, and it's not a separate add-in or anything. It's just part of the service. You don't even know it's there. You comfortably using Office 365 don't even have to know anything about it. But on the new administration portal for Office 365, if you go on the admin center, if you go all the way over to the left and all the way down at the bottom, you'll see this new little tab that says Azure. And if you click that, then it'll take you to this page, have you sign up for a free Azure subscription, and then you'll be able to start to see all of the magic goodness that is Azure AD that you probably didn't even know you had access to. Things like Office 365 has multi-factor authentication. Well, with Azure AD Premium, then you can add your own apps in there. Like I can enable access to Salesforce. And then I can say, well, anybody who has access to Salesforce also has multi-factor authentication for that application. Or any applications that maybe I code an internal line of business application and I use Azure AD to be able to authenticate users. Then the cool part about that is that I can enable multi-factor authentication on a per application basis using Azure AD. That's not something that you could do with Office 365's version of Azure AD. So when you start to manage the Azure AD tenant, and even if you upgrade to the premium SKU, that's when you really get a whole bunch of really cool capabilities that you probably didn't know that you had before.
Yeah, and I wanted to reiterate something that you talked about. If you're building SharePoint in Azure, and is that supported for production payloads yet?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Because it wasn't originally, if I remember, SharePoint in Azure was not. But anyway,
Oh,
so
wait. All right, so you're talking. Okay, so when we say
sorry.
SharePoint, yeah, I'm like, okay, now we're starting to blend all the different permutations. Yeah, so we do support SharePoint for production. I think it's called best. It's not best. It's commercially viable support now. We can't even say best effort. It's called commercially viable support for your virtual machines that you have.
In Azure VM.
Yes, I said that correctly.
Okay.
I've been out of PFE a couple of years, but I think I still have that terminology now.
Yeah. So like Kirk was saying, if you've got Azure VMs and you've got your SharePoint 2013 farm stood up in there, you still need a domain controller for the machines and for the service accounts, but you can now, well, you've been able to for a while, use Azure AD for your users. So you can mix and match all that. So it's not for service accounts yet, it's not for machines yet, but it's for your users.
Right, and so one of the cool opportunities, though, is if you're going to put SharePoint in virtual machines in Azure, one of the reasons that you might be doing that is because you want to have a public-facing SharePoint farm. And if you're going to do that, then you may not want to manage the users in Active Directory. You might want to be able to give them federated access, and you can use Azure AD to provide that federated access. So now you can add those external users in there and authenticate them. So what you'll end up with is something, if you've used SAML claims or ADFS, it's going to kind of look and have a lot of those same challenges with SharePoint. You still a custom claims picker, and of course there's always some SharePoint things that are going to be broken when you try to use claims, but you can use that as your claims provider and use Azure AD for authentication, and that's going to buy you that external authentication and being able to provide that federation that it was a little bit more difficult if you tried to use your own AD instance.
Yeah, and another cool thing that you can do with Azure AD, you can do directory syncing, and let me look at my notes and make sure we're not going to talk about that. So we don't have that in there. But we can do directory syncing. So if you have an on-prem AD, you can sync some or all of those users up into Azure AD, which gives them, they're now security objects in there. They can be given access to whatever. You can create users in Azure AD on top of that. And you can also add like live ID users and things like that. So now you've got this mix and match. So now let's imagine you've got an on-prem AD that has your users in it, and that gives access to email or something like that. But you want to give external people access to things too. Now you can add them only in Azure AD or add their live IDs, and then they can get into that piece, but there's no way they can travel back through and get into your on-prem stuff. And the thing is, it's super easy to set up. I've even done it, and it's worked.
And that's the cool part. A lot of the IT pros have probably already fought with DirSync in the past.
Yeah.
One of the things that just happened this past week was we just made generally available, or RTM, or available for whatever it means that we released now. We got
GA, generally available, I think is what they called it.
Well, GA, RTM, RTW, all these different.
WTF.
WTF, right? So it's released. It's public. This thing called AAD Connect, Azure AD Connect. What Azure AD Connect provides is it's kind of the next evolution of DirSync. It is a wizard-based driven approach to be able to set up the synchronization from your on-premises AD instance. And when we say on-premises, that can be in your data center, in rack space. It might even be your VM that's in Azure IaaS. So when I'm saying on-premises here, I really mean anywhere you install. Even better, you ran the SharePoint farm wizard, right? Yeah. It's wherever you run the SharePoint farm wizard. That's where I'm calling on-premises here.
Yep.
So DirSync, yeah, I'm seeing in the notes here, add DirSync. So DirSync was a little bit of a challenge. There were some scenarios that it made a little bit difficult. Azure AD Connect actually addresses a whole bunch of those issues, and it's not just about synchronizing your on-premises AD, but it also helps you set up ADFS as well. So it helps you set up your identity infrastructure, and now that starts to bring in why I'm so excited about Azure AD is because it does more stuff than just its groups and users and multi-factor auth. One of the cool things it adds in there is if you're going to use ADFS, think about all the problems that you probably have with that. You have to update your certificate 1 or 2 years. You probably have to install some hot fixes. That's a security infrastructure, so you need to make sure that thing's up to date. That's a part that lags in a lot of companies. One of the things that Azure AD introduces is this thing called the health component. And this health component can install on the ADFS servers, and it'll report back as part of all of the other Azure AD stuff you're doing to say if those servers are healthy or not. And it'll say things like, you have a certificate that's about to expire. You need to go to your ADFS servers and update that. It's kind of like a best practices checker for ADFS, but integrated with Azure AD. So it's one-stop shopping for all of your identity needs. Oh, that should be a tagline for the Azure AD team. I need to Todd, write that down.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's, and that was part of the thing that got me excited. I saw some of the stuff that you were doing, and you were showing some of the applications, and then at Ignite, the same kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, there's just so much potential here. And that's when I ran home, and after Ignite, Azure AD Connect was still in preview. You had to get it off the Connect site and all that. And I started running it, well, I guess before that, because I did a session at Ignite that used it with my sites. But like you said, it was wizard based, and I was just amazed at how well it worked. Now the marketing folks at Microsoft have said that Azure AD Connect for the dir sync functionality, the push out, is 4 clicks, I think they've said.
That
might be a touch optimistic, but it's not bad.
All right, so why that? Okay, that is true. So if you stand up your own little lab server and it only has one domain in it, and you're just syncing that one forest, that one domain out, sure, 4 clicks, you're done, and you're only using password sync, and you're not doing write back, and you're not doing all that other stuff, right? So if you have that very simple one-way sync out solution, absolutely, it is 4 clicks. What I've experienced in most of my customers, it's a heck of a lot more than 4 clicks. There's going to be things, and this is what's so cool about Azure AD Connect, is because our customers probably have things like 2 different forests or a resource forest, or they have 2 separate forests where there's no trust between them, and you need to sync users from both of those into one Active Directory domain. Azure AD Connect actually does all of those scenarios and even more. And that's one of the things I was like, wow, they put a lot of engineering behind this to solve what used to be a very hard problem. I actually feel bad for those guys who spent a lot of time and effort and used to make a lot of money on this scenario, because it kind of took some of their paycheck away. But at the benefit of everybody who's been frustrated and trying to use this thing, it actually does solve a lot of these problems. I've been really happy showing that off to customers.
Yeah, and one of the great things about Azure AD Connect, and like you said, it's super easy to use, and I'm going to come back to that whole people who used to make a lot of money on it stuff. But one of the things that I like about it is there are so many levels to it. So you can just do the push of your domain, or you can do groups and adding people, or you can do the thing where you can write passwords back if you've got Azure AD Premium. I mean, there's all these different things. But the great thing about Azure AD Connect is you can get something set up, and then when you decide to take that next little bite, you just rerun the wizard and just click the next box, and it just keeps building on top of it. It's not like you get everything set up and then you want to add one more thing. They're like, oh, you got to wipe all that out, you got to delete all that, you got to start from scratch. It just builds. Even if you go from the dir sync stuff into ADFS, it all still just builds right on top of it, and it makes it so easy to use. And talking about people that used to make money on that, that's something at Rackspace. We have this technical career track. That's a thing I'm in. It's a way for technical people to advance in their careers without having to go into management and things like that. So last year we had a group, had a big meeting for that, and one of the guys that did a keynote was talking about this kind of thing, and he's like, anything that can be done will eventually become scripted, will eventually become a commodity, and you can't get super hot at a particular technology and just sit there, because if you do, it's going to pass you by. And he's like, how many of us knew that obnoxious Linux admin in the late 90s, that got a huge salary and was just a butt to everybody because he could be? Now anybody can install Linux. It's not a big deal. He's like, so wherever you're comfortable, don't get comfortable there. Keep learning new things, because you're going to get passed by. And that was another part of the motivation for me jumping into Azure was, I kind of been doing this SharePoint thing forever. And
I heard a good joke by Don Box one time. My own little worship there. Funny enough, the Linux is addressing the Linux crowd about just do it our way. It was guys who recompile the kernel all the time don't get laid. And what he was kind of joking about was, if you spend so much time doing the same thing over and over, and these are the things that you're doing, you're not having time to go out and experience and learn new things and experience other things. I paraphrased an hour-and-a-half talk of his with that one sentence, but it's kind of true. I did this when I was in Premier Photo Engineering. I was really excited about the whole SharePoint master program, and I focused really deeply on, God rest his soul. It was really excited about the ITPro stuff for SharePoint. And then I started looking around and seeing where all the company's investments are. And apologies to Bill Baer and co., that's not where the investments are. The investments are out towards Azure and it's Office 365. And Satya has been very clear about the path forward is enabling for mobile and cloud. And I think ignoring that would be it's everywhere. If there's one thing I could recommend to anybody on this podcast, I think this is the technology that absolutely you should and must invest your time in. Go learn identity. Go learn Azure AD Connect. Go learn Azure AD. If there's one thing you could do to provide some kind of bulletproofed vest thing to your career, it's this. This is the thing that will do that.
Yeah, so last Tech Ed in Houston, I think it was, Shane and I were doing a pre-conference thing on SharePoint installation, our whole, tired gag, and we were walking to the event center with John Craddock, who is I don't know if he's an MVP or not, but he's been doing this stuff forever, and we're just kind of shooting the breeze. We're like, hey, John, what are you talking about? And he's like, oh, I'm doing this stuff on identity and all that, and I'm like, man, I kind of wish I could go sit in on your session. Because I'm absolutely with you. Identity is kind of the next frontier. Just so we've got all these things going on, and figuring out how to mesh it all together is absolutely where the future is.
Yep. So I think one of the things that I would recommend to any devs out there, if you have set up a virtual machine. Doesn't matter if it's on your local machine. Doesn't matter if it's in Rackspace and IaaS virtual machine in Azure, wherever. Go in Amazon for all I care. Just go create a domain controller. I've got a blog post somewhere floating out there that says how easy it is just to create a virtual machine with a domain controller. And that's going to be kind of the same old 1996 version of a domain controller you've known and loved for years and years. But the next step is then go create a domain in Azure AD. They're free. I feel like Oprah. You get a free directory. You get a free directory. You all get a free directory. But it's actually directories are free, and they're not tied to an Azure subscription. So you can create a directory without an Azure subscription, and that's going to let you start playing around with stuff like Azure AD Connect. Oh, I did another sentence with so. Please, I have an actual game. It's a slap game. It's a slap game. Anytime you're in a presentation and you hear a Microsoft presenter start a sentence with the word so, hit the person next to you. And just watch chaos break out during a keynote. You'll next time you sit in a keynote, just imagine that you see all these people just randomly starting to hit their neighbor. It's an awesome game. Something to think, or it's a drinking game. Either way you want to do. Anyway, so there's another one. If this is a drinking game, I think Eric Little is going to be like buzzed here pretty soon if he's doing shots listening to me. Anyway, the reason why I was saying that is create a directory. Learn how to do a simple synchronization. Go back and change some user attributes. Do a sync. Go back and add some custom attributes. Do a sync. See that they actually are promoted out. And then, if you really want to get adventurous, install Exchange on premises. And then after that, try to do the write back. Do a password write back, a group write back, attribute write back. Now, to do that, you're going to have to expand beyond just the free version. You're going to have to use Azure AD Premium. Luckily, there's a trial for those, so you can use one. I think it's 90 days. So upgrade to the premium version for 90 days and play around with that. Learn how to make that happen. That to me is career longevity. Because if I go to a customer and I look and see what are 90% of your trouble tickets that are around identity, I can already tell you what the answer is. It's going to be change my password. I need to change it. And the fact is we have to hire expensive directory admins to do nothing more than change people's passwords. That is disgusting, to put it bluntly. So the fact is that you can now enable, using Azure AD, you can enable people to go change their own passwords. And if you don't trust them enough, set up multi-factor authentication while you're at it to ensure that it's not some bad guy. And then you're going to get all the kind of reporting stuff. And oh man, can you tell I actually like this technology really well? I could talk about this for a long time.
Yeah, so I did want to say one thing. Oh, we're getting a bad echo.
Echo.
So your idea about going out and setting up a VM with a domain controller, I'm with you, but don't put it on Amazon. Put it on Rackspace, for goodness sakes, man. Come on.
All right, I was trying to be politically correct and not say, why aren't you using Azure?
Jeez, yeah. But I want to reiterate what you said, that the Azure AD has got 3 flavors: free, basic, and premium. And free, much like the name would suggest, is free, and so that lets you kind of play with the interface and play with the different, the syncing and all that for nothing. And that's I've got a ton of those. I've got like a OneNote that's got all my different tenants in it because I'm trying all these different crazy things. But yeah, Azure AD is free, and I think that's genius on Microsoft's part, because then people are going to get in there, they're going to play with it for free, and then find all these great ways to use it, and that's going to get them hooked.
And admittedly, it does a lot more than just allow you to. Yeah, I'm watching here. I'm like, hey Jeff, how are you, buddy? Good to see you. It allows you to do a lot more than just play around and do like those simple scenarios. Like you said, it's going to let you see the value of things like the reports. The fact that how those reports are generated are really interesting. The fact that, okay, so I have my own on-prem AD infrastructure, and I have a bunch of old white-haired neckbeards that I think are really good at security, and our stuff is never going to get hacked. And then you go in and you start to really peer around. You're like, oh, you do that? Oh, that's not a good thing. The cool thing about Azure AD is, first, it gets rid of some of that old white neckbeard thing and allows you to then go back and really start to just use it as a service. And as part of the service, it feeds data from third-party SaaS services and even from Microsoft's digital crimes unit. So as we go back and we shut down all these botnets, and you hear about that on the news all the time, hopefully you will. As we shut down all these botnets, we also have a huge amount of intelligence about how they were constructed, what IP ranges they use, and what were their attack vectors. And we apply all of that machine learning back into Azure AD to make sure that we're protecting the identities and we're making a rock-solid foundation for our customers to actually very much build on and trust us. And that trust is huge in the service.
Yeah, and so being a Rackspace guy, I've had this discussion on-prem and off-prem and all that. And one of the things that people always talk about is if your stuff is in the cloud, be it at Rackspace or Azure or wherever, it feels less secure. And what that comes down to is, somebody, if something happens, the worst happens, somebody gets hacked, the feeling of security of being able to go in and just unplug the internet connection from the router feels very powerful. But what I've had to tell folks is that's the illusion of security, because at that point, you're already hacked. You're already screwed. So going with a place like Rackspace or Microsoft, we're proactive. We keep you from getting hacked in the first place, so there's no need to yank that wire out. And like you said, you've got these guys that are, I'm sure, very smart, and I'm sure their families love them and all that kind of stuff. But they don't live and breathe security like our security folks do, like Microsoft security folks do, for goodness sakes. And they're always one step ahead of these kind of people. And that's what the next, the level of security is. So I've kind of come to terms with all that. Being acquired by Rackspace 3.5 years ago, I had Jeff Diverter in the chat room. We had this come to Jesus talk about on-prem and hosting, and I kind of saw the light, so that was good.
Yeah, by the way, and I saw the comment in there that Rackers like Kirk. Absolutely big fan of Rackspace, have been for years, and have some of the most amazing talent that's at that company. So kudos to y'all as well.
Oh,
we can co-optate.
Absolutely, yeah. There's room for everybody.
Exactly.
All right. So we kind of got so one of the things that you wanted to talk about, and I think you kind of hit it. One of the notes you had was, are there any features in Office 365 users will are there any features that Office 365 users will see value in Azure AD? I wanted to throw that link out there. Did you want to hit that with anything?
Yeah. One of the things, I just avoided starting a sentence with "so." This is actually a pain point of mine. I make fun of others for it, but my wife calls me out for doing it too. So I'm still working on it. I'm going to start substituting "as" in there. That's what I'll do. It's the new stutter. Yeah, Kirk Hart at Rackspace. One of the cool things that Victor pointed out in his blog that just got pointed in the link there was the fact that there's this thing in Azure AD called dynamic groups. And what it allows is you to do things like anybody who has an attribute like marketing, or is in the marketing department, or has a phone number starting with 678, then you can actually dynamically place them into a group. And all I have to do is, I just hire this new guy, Todd Klindt. He comes into our organization, and I set his attribute to say, he's in the marketing department. Suddenly, he now has access to all these resources because he was dynamically added to groups simply by the virtue of him having that attribute. Didn't have to actually have anybody go back and add him to groups manually, or him to go back and request access to groups. It just happened. And when that just happened, now he automatically gets signed up for things like dynamic licensing, where I can say, okay, anybody who's in this group gets his license. So anybody who's in this group gets his license to Salesforce. So anybody who is in this group gets a license to Salesforce and is automatically provisioned in Salesforce. That, to me, is just some of the coolest stuff that they've been working on. Even better, it works the other way as well. Have been working with this thing called Workday, where it's a HR onboarding system. With Workday, you can go in and start to onboard a new employee. Well, the cool thing is with Azure AD, because we have moved identity off premises and we now have a central point of trust in the cloud, now Workday can provision users into Azure AD. And because we have that group write back and the user write back and the password write back function, that can actually provision that user back on-prem. So I can start onboard the user in Workday, and because we set up Azure AD as the central point of trust, now it comes back and provisions them on-prem. We do the sync, and the sync goes out to Azure AD, and we get everything, all the sync stuff working, and now we're going to sign them to Office 365, and now they have SharePoint, Exchange, Link, Salesforce, Workday, ServiceNow, ticketing. They have all these really cool things, and really just about the fact that they have all these different things, these tendrils that are kind of coming off this central thing that is a directory as a service in the cloud.
Yeah, and that's another really great part about this, and another genius thing on Microsoft's side, I think, is that Azure AD is completely has REST APIs completely exposed. So if the thing that you want to do isn't in Azure AD, or you've got some third-party app that you're writing or whatever, hooking into Azure AD and creating users and changing passwords and all that kind of stuff is super easy to bake into your own app. There are also a bunch of pretty good PowerShell commandlets out there. So if you're a PowerShell kind of person, you can do all that kind of stuff in PowerShell and write scripts that do things. It's a lot of fun. It's very good. And I think so. The more I read about it, the more I'm like, oh, that's they nailed that. It's hard to say no to.
So one of the latest demos that I started doing was exactly that. I provision a user in Active Directory, my little virtual machine. Mine's running in Azure, of course, because I get some Azure credits that I get to use as a Microsoft employee. But I add that user in there, And then I start the synchronization process using Azure AD Connect. That puts them out to Azure AD. Then after that, I can show up in the Office 365 admin page. I can say, oh, look, let me go check my email real quick and show there's nothing in my inbox. Taunt the users in the audience, sign me up for some kind of email marketing campaign, whatever. And then from there, go back and say, okay, now here's the dynamic licensing part thing for Salesforce that just happened. Give me about 10 minutes, and that user is going to be provisioned in Salesforce, shows up on their My Apps page. Oh, another cool thing, by the way, if y'all haven't seen this, is called myapps.microsoft.com. You know that launcher bar that's in Office 365? I guess we're calling it the app launcher. Well, that is a standalone page as well. So if I go back and I add that user into Salesforce and they have the ability to see that, and they have permissions to that app, suddenly that'll show up in their My Apps. They just go click on that, boom, they're logged into Salesforce without having to re-enter their credentials. Another cool thing is that iOS. So I was joking before about the fruit devices. We have an iOS app that you can install on an iPad. So now the CEO actually can just go click on some. You can't even see this while I'm doing this. I'm like doing hand motions to myself. This is funny. They can actually go click on the iPad on the fruit device and be taken straight to Salesforce or straight over to even their on-prem SharePoint farm. Which, if you think about an iPad to an on-prem SharePoint farm, that just sounds like NTLM hell of challenges or some kind of weird remote desktop thing that just sounds unnatural, but it actually works. So one of the other things that Azure AD introduced is this thing called Azure AD Application Proxy. So it's not even just about groups and users and apps. Now it's about exposing on-premises solutions out through this identity infrastructure.
Yeah, and that was one of the things you did a demo of in London, and that was pretty cool. And I've shown that to a few folks, and they I would explain it to them. I would say, no, really, you can have this SharePoint web app that's like HTTP internal only, and make it available to somebody on their iPad in the cloud, so they can sit at their kid's soccer game and do all that stuff through the internet. And it absolutely works. And the thing that I love about it is, since it's all based on Azure AD, now we can say when they log into this from their desktop, they just log right in. When they log into it from the internet, this is kind of sensitive stuff. It's going to trigger that multi-factor auth, so they're going to have to put in their PIN or something, but only if they access it this way. If they're on-prem, it doesn't hit. So I mean, it's just that stuff is so cool.
All right, so selfishly, the aha moment for me was the fact that I could take that on-prem SharePoint farm, but I could expose it to external users with MFA for central administration. So I can take just central admin, expose it out for just my admins, have MFA so nobody's scared about it, and then say, and now we don't have to do remote desktop in the middle of the night to go manage SharePoint farms. Just pull up the iPad right there at the nightstand and click on the button. Now you're on central admin.
Yeah,
it's a very cool concept.
Yeah, and for the sad, unfortunate non-SharePoint folks, this is also a super easy way to expose Outlook Anywhere. Same kind of deal. Now you don't have to have all these cumbersome network devices and have to deal with those networking guys because they're all miserable trolls. Now you can do it all in Azure, and it's cool and it's fun, and yeah, just the possibilities were endless. So I think Azure AD, Azure Application Proxy, I think that requires premium, if I remember.
Yeah, a lot of the feature, admittedly, so you're going to get some basic features with the free version. There's going to be some limits, number of apps. There's going to be no password write back, no group write back, that kind of stuff. With Office 365, it introduces a couple of new things. Like it'll add in things like some advanced security reports, and you get 3 reports off of it. But also gives you multi-factor auth, but not that per app auth that I was talking about before. And if you're going to use apps like I was talking about, Salesforce, Workday, that stuff, you only get 10 apps per user. With Azure AD Premium, that's actually where I would see a lot of our organizations start to step up and see the value, because it's going to expose so many other things. And somebody in the feed was saying, yeah, but it's $6 per user per month. Well, there's a lot of value in that $6. There's all the stuff I was saying about the integration with digital crimes unit data, the protection, but also being able to protect on per application basis, access to applications. And so upgrading from just the Azure AD that comes with Office 365 up to AD Premium, that's where you're really going to start to realize a lot of the value. And that's going to get rid of a whole bunch of things that you're spending a lot of time, effort, and real money. Things like Azure AD Application Proxy, that's a reverse proxy as software. So that, in theory, could remove some of your reverse proxy infrastructure. Using Azure AD, if you don't need to authenticate to your on-prem AD, then you could remove the ADFS portion of your infrastructure. In theory, again, that's stretching a little far, but it's also saying in a couple years you can actually see exactly where this is going, that it's consolidating a lot of these efforts and investments that the old the white-haired neckbeard has been coddling for years and making it really difficult for us to get things done in the network. Suddenly it starts to move those really difficult things out to the cloud and lets you focus on real business value instead of just rebuilding Linux kernels.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. So we're getting like 45 minutes. I got some other stuff to talk about. You had one more thing in your notes about developers. Normally on this podcast,
I'm not even gonna bore you with all the dev stuff.
Normally I mock those people, but I will mention I haven't looked at the link that you brought up specifically. So if you have anything you want to talk about that, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, as everybody on this podcast knows, I'm a huge fan of PowerShell. So on my normal machine, like I've always got Outlook open. I've always got my remote desktop thing open. I've always got a search page for funny cat videos open, and I've always got a PowerShell window open. I mean, that's just like those things. Just when a machine boots up, those four things come up. So for Azure and for Azure AD, the PowerShell commandlets are pretty good. They're a little confusing. For us SharePoint folks, the way you form things isn't how, but it's usable. For SharePoint Online, the PowerShell commandments are anemic and pathetic. But one of the things, and it might be in your link there, is the developer patterns and practices page kind of shows how to do a bunch of things with CSOM, and turns out you can drop CSOM right into PowerShell. And so now as a IT pro, you can go to this patterns and practices, or PNP as they call it, and start building out commandlets that let you do IT stuff using CSOM. So there is a reason to use some of that dev stuff without losing any self-respect.
And another thing I would point out, that Azure AD has its own RESTful-based API. It's called the Graph API. So a lot of limitations with those weird PowerShell commandlets. If you use the Graph API, you can do really cool stuff with it. Things like you want to read the change log. So with Active Directory on premises, that's how SharePoint does user profile synchronization. It just reads the change log off of AD and says what changed over since I ran last time, and it does an incremental sync over to SharePoint. You can do kind of the same thing here, where you can go read the Graph API and get its changes, and then you can start to do things like maybe you want to do a synchronization with your own LDAP-based server, or I don't know, I'm kind of making up scenarios, but the fact that you have all this capability with the Graph API is really very cool.
Yeah, and that's one of those things. There's a lot of non-Microsoft folks out there, and that Graph API and the ability to use those RESTful commands makes their excuses for not embracing it a lot more ridiculous.
Yeah.
So we could go on all night, and I would love to. Maybe we'll have to bring you back another week, because this is all. So the chat room has just been crazy busy tonight, and everybody's loving the stuff we're talking about. So we may have to do this again. But I did want to move on to a couple of other things, and I'll keep you online here, Kirk, because I think you probably can contribute a little bit. But around Azure and all that, did you have any of the stuff that you wanted to mention?
No, I would urge developers and IT pros alike, go to azure.com, start to read some of the documentation. If you're using Office 365, go down to that, go to the admin center, and go to over on the left side, all the way down, click on that Azure AD link, and start to discover the things that you may not be familiar with. try the premium trial for a little while and just play around with some of the features. When it reverts back, it'll be back in a working state. It's not like you'll be in a broken state, but the integration opportunities there are things like Office 365 groups, and then being able to turn those Office 365 groups into dynamic groups in Azure AD. There's so many really cool capabilities there. I'd urge everybody, just go tinker around, play, learn. If it's not for you, great, but if you might discover something that's going to benefit your business.
All right. So yeah, and I think, like I said, there's been a lot of great discussion. I think we might have to schedule you to come back after I conquer that 533 exam. We can we can talk about that. I think you've taken that too, haven't you?
533 or 534?
I think 533 is the infrastructure.
Yeah, congrats on you. I failed that one.
I haven't taken it yet. I haven't passed it yet. So let's not get ahead of ourselves.
I passed 532, which is the dev exam, and 534, which is the architecture. 533, I took it and failed it by just a little bit. Turns out I need to learn more about networking and IP ranges and stuff. So I'm going to go back and learn more about CIDR, IP formats, and then I'll be good to go.
Those of us in the know call that CIDR, so that might be your first step, is referring to CIDR addresses. But that was for free. You could have that one. Probably won't be on the test. Please lean into the microphone and pronounce this. CID. Yeah, probably nothing like that. Again, could talk about this stuff all night, but there's a bunch of other great stuff that came out last week. For those of you that have been following the podcast for a while, you know that I've been doing the Windows 10 thing. And it looks like we are really close to Windows 10, the build that ends up being RTM coming out. And so we know that Microsoft has said that the 29th of this month is when that's going to hit the streets. And for those of us in the Insider program, we're going to get it. Those of you that have reserved your digital download, however that works, you're going to get it early. But they have to have the build out and finished a couple of weeks ahead of time. And it looks like this week is the week that they're going to do that. And so that's pretty exciting. You could tell last week they were adding a lot of finishing touches, a lot of final touches. I think those of us in the fast ring got 3 builds last week, like 10,152, 10,153, then I think it settled on 10,162 is where my machines are at now. So we're kind of on the home stretch. But one thing that's interesting is that Microsoft is embracing this whole Windows as a service thing. And they've already said that when Windows 10 RTMs and when it gets sent to the the OEMs, Dell and HP and those folks, it's not going to have everything because it's going to be a service now. So it's going to come out, it's going to lay down the base, and then features are going to start trickling out. And those of us in the Insider programs and in the fast rings are going to get those new features sooner. But it's not going to be fully baked. And not in a bad way, but in a month or so they might add some new some crazy technology. So I've been using it on a bunch of machines for many months now, and the 10,162 build has been pretty solid for me. I've got it on a couple of desktop machines and a laptop that's got a touch screen, and it's been pretty good. So Kirk, I can't tell if you're still in or not, but are you using Windows 10 for the desktop anywhere?
I am not. I am running Windows 8.1 and whatever AT&T pushed on my phone. I think it's like 8.
Okay, so you're no good. I'm surprised. Honestly, I'm surprised that Microsoft isn't making you.
They do. I kind of am not participating.
I've chosen not to participate in that particular.
No, it's a solid OS, and it was really fun to play with. I travel every single week, and I was having some unique driver display issues when connecting to everybody's different projector systems. And I finally just decided it's not worth the risk. I'd much rather have a good show. And so Windows 8.1, stable as anything, never had a problem with it. I'll just continue to use that for a while. Gotcha. Wait for RTM to come out.
Yeah, which I think you'll probably have access to, here in a couple of days. So it looks like they're getting close on that. So the other thing, and people in the chat room have been asking about it, and I talked to you a little bit about it before, is Windows 10 for the phone. And so Kirk, you probably didn't hear about any of this, but a month or so ago, when one of the new builds of Windows 10 for the phone came out, I put it on my daily driver, my Lumia 830, and it was crap. It was horrible. And within like an hour of me putting it on and me sobbing uncontrollably, I flashed my phone back to Windows Phone 8 point whatever was the preview for developers view. And I talked about it on this podcast. And the folks at CMS Wire transcribed this and then posted as an article on CMS Wire, and they get a whole bunch more traction than I get on this piddly blog and all this. And the internet, just the jackals on the internet just attacked me, fangs to my neck, about how I didn't understand it was beta software and how I hate Windows Phone, and you'd think I'd made fun of their mothers or something. It was horrible. But Microsoft has updated the Windows Phone 10 preview a couple of times since that ill-fated podcast, and it's gotten pretty good. Now, I'm not brave enough yet to put it on my daily driver, so I've got a Lumia 630, 635 that I've been using it on. Play with it. What?
It looks shiny.
Yes, well, everything. I mean, you're shiny. My forehead's shiny. I forgot to do my.
I'm washed out white back there. You can't even see any features. It's just the hair and the chins.
Yes, but the Windows 10 on the phone is getting better. I'm not convinced yet that I want to put it on my daily driver, but we're getting closer. We're within spitting distance of that. And Microsoft has said that Windows Phone 10 will not come out on the 29th like the desktop will, but that's okay. I'm good with waiting a little bit on that, but I haven't quite given up on the platform yet. One final thing that I wanted to talk about is this, so Windows 10's coming down the pike and everything's getting renamed and stuff like that. And today Microsoft blogged that Xbox Music, so the app that's on Windows and all that, and the service itself, is being renamed. And for us SharePoint folks, this new name is particularly amusing. They are renaming Xbox Music to Groove. And so for those of us who've been doing the SharePoint thing for a while, we will remember Groove as a product that Microsoft bought in the SharePoint 2007 days that was kind of an offline sync thing, maybe, sort of. Groove was one of those things where it was always the answer but never the solution. So they'd be like, hey, I need to bring documents down. And I'm like, oh, yeah, Groove does that. But Groove didn't ever really do that. So yeah, and there was a lot of speculation that Microsoft bought Groove for Ray Ozzie, who was the architect and all that, and the guy that I think he developed Lotus 1-2-3 or something. But now, so that's what Xbox Music is going to be called, Groove. Xbox Video is now going to be called Movies and TV, something like that. So that was funny. So I had to post the picture Rod Trent. He's one of the guys from Windows ITPro, and he took a movie trailer for The Emperor's New Groove, that movie from the 90s, and Microsoft's New Groove, and it's pretty funny. So I've put that in the chat room. So I guess with Windows 10, once we get another update, that'll start showing up. I guess it'll be the same service. I don't know what's going to be different other than having a goofy name, but I just, as a SharePoint guy, I had to mention that. So I've got one more segment left, Kirk. I'm going to do my shameless self-promotion. I'm going to not make you suffer through that. So do you want to say goodbye to everybody and all that before I kick you out?
Thank y'all so much for sticking around and listening to my lame jokes, and very much appreciate. Todd, thank you very much for having me. It's good to see you again, and hope to see you in person soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to talk to you. I'll see you later. All right, now that we've got that guy out of here. So in all seriousness, I was very excited to get Kirk on here, and I've been talking to a couple other folks, getting them on as guests. I'm kind of working on some stuff, getting some scheduling stuff figured out, but we'll have some news on that hopefully next week. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about was shameless self-promotion. Not a lot of changes since last month. I'm going to be doing the Mississippi PowerShell user group here in a month, and that will be Tuesday, August 11th at 8:30 Central, 8:30 p.m. Central. There'll be a link for that, and you can go to their webpage and get that link. I'll be doing it remotely, and I think everybody will be able to view it remotely if they want to. We haven't decided yet what the topic is going to be, but we're coming up on a month now. I kind of feel like we need to do that. So I'll get with Mike Robbins and those guys and get that decided on. And then a couple of weeks later, August 24th through the 27th is SP TechCon out in Boston. And that's going to be pretty exciting. I'm going to be doing a PowerShell session out there. I'm going to be doing an upgrade session and then just bothering everybody that I can, talking to everybody. And if you are at SP TechCon, I assume Rackspace is going to have a booth, so swing by there. Come find me in person, shake my hand, introduce yourself. I'm super friendly. I'd love to talk to all of you. And Lori will be out there, so you'll be able to meet the executive producer and all that. And then September 18th and the 19th is SharePoint Palooza, and that is in beautiful, picturesque Branson, Missouri. So you can come down there, see Yakov Smirnoff, and then come for some SharePoint stuff there. I haven't decided for sure which topics I'm going to talk about. Been talking to those guys. Are kind of kicking a few around, but I'll have something about that soon. So thanks everybody. We ran long this week, but I couldn't stop talking to Kirk about all the great things that Azure AD has to offer. So we went a little long, but thanks everybody. We'll be back next week, regular time and all that. And I'll see you then. Thanks. Have a good night.